it'd be easy to say, oh, sure, if I could go back to 1996 and get an 18-year-old Logan and say, don't do this. Pursue theater with everything you have. Part of me goes, man, that would have been great. The other part of me goes, then I don't have this story to tell. And it's an important story to tell. Not for me. I think more so for our dogs, our service animals that are over there. In 1996, while I was a senior in high school, I enlisted in the Utah National Guard and in the 19th Special Forces Group, Airborne, because I thought it would be pretty cool to be jumping out of planes and all that kind of stuff. I wanted to earn that Green Beret. They're the professional soldiers. Their motto is De Oppresso Libre, liberate the oppressed. And I was really drawn to that idea of service. And ultimately, wasn't up to the task. And during that time, I had also started training at the University of Utah's acting conservatory to get my bachelor's in fine arts. And it ended up really fulfilling me, and it became a great passion of mine. Then 9/11 happened. And after that, in 2004, my senior year of training at the university, I got called to active duty. So I went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, went through another annual training period there, and then I requested to be assigned to the 10th Mountain Division in Fort Drum. We were going to be deployed, and then I heard about this dog program. And that sounded a lot more appealing than doing demining operations in Afghanistan, laying on my belly with a probe and just day after day after day. 2 weeks later, I came down on orders to get transferred to Fort Leonard Wood to the 67th Mine Dog Detachment. I met Diego there, and we went through a 14-week dog course that was 8 hours a day, Monday through Friday. And it was really clear that Diego and I had a connection. So after our graduation, we had about 3 weeks before we were going to deploy to Iraq. Basically, for our area, any unit could request us. I worked with Army, Navy SEALs, the Marines mostly, even Iraqi Army and Iraqi police. We'd go out all the times. We'd have every kind of mission, vehicle checks, buildings, perimeters, IED sweeps, cache searches. There was a bounty on both of our heads that was placed there by the Mujahideen, $200,000 cash, US, for anyone who could either get me or the dog. They understand that if you can compromise one of us, the dog team doesn't function any longer. We had one IED that was triggered on our vehicle, and that was a cell phone trigger. That was the first combat that I had experienced over there. You have this incredible surge of adrenaline and hyper awareness, and then you don't have anything to do with that energy. And Diego came over, he knew something was wrong, so he tackled me. And he put his feet on my chest and he starts licking my face and he's saying, hey, Dad, it's okay. We're all right, you know? So when we left Iraq in January of 2007, we were accredited with finding over 250,000 pounds of weapons, ammunitions, and explosives. And we also found 4 IEDs before they detonated. So that was our big success. We finished up our deployment. We flew out of Baghdad on the day they executed Saddam Hussein. And then I knew my contract with the Army was up. I had finished my service and I knew he was staying. And then it came time to leave. I was done, get off base. I was eager to get home. I was eager to get out of service. I was eager to get back to the theater, but it's like leaving a child behind. So I spent the whole day in the kennel. We went for a walk until he was too tired to walk anymore. And then we both curled up on his bed until about 5 o'clock, and it was time for me to leave. And I said my goodbye to him and cried and got in my car and left. And then he goes through the process of breaking the connection with me and creating a new connection with his next handler. So once I ended my time in service, I went back to Utah, re-enrolled in the university, and went back to finish my last year of undergraduate for my bachelor's. Once that was finished, then I moved to Chicago, and I worked as an actor there for 2 years, and then decided to come to the University of Missouri at Kansas City to earn my master's in acting and directing. And all through this time, there's the occasional check-in with my old unit just to say, hey, how's Diego doing? Eventually that search hit a roadblock. You know, it got to the point where none of the guys that I was in that unit with were there anymore. Eventually I tracked down somebody who said, no, Diego's not in the Army anymore. He's working for Transportation Security Administration. I'm never gonna find him if he's in the TSA. And then somebody was like, hey, you should create a Facebook page. Okay, why not? So I created a page called Bring Diego Home, and I started posting it on all of the Military Working Dog Association Facebook pages. Has anyone seen anything? And it took a week before a woman said, I'm a civilian employee at Lackland Air Force Base, and I'm pretty sure I've seen that dog. So I called this guy and said, hey, I'm looking for my dog. He's a yellow lamb named Diego. This is his tattoo number. And he was like, oh yeah, I know that dog. You do? He's like, yeah, I'll call you back. So he went into his kennel with his cell phone and took a picture of Diego and texted it to me. You know, it had been 7 years. I had no idea where he was. I hadn't seen him. He was gray. He was an old dog. He was 10 years old. So I called him back and said, what's his status? I want to adopt him. You know, they were able to tell me he's getting pretty old. Retirement is probably an option for him. Just keep calling back and letting us know. I wasn't about to sit back and just say, okay, I'll just keep calling and eventually you'll tell me I can come get him. I wrote my senators, I wrote my congressmen. PETA found out through Facebook. They sent 600 letters to the Secretary's office in a single day. During all of this campaigning, I don't know that they're already planning on retiring Diego to me, but they can't tell me that. So I called him up in August and was like, hey, what's going on? And I think it was kind of okay, fine. The paperwork is done. I can tell you, you can come get your dog on this date. Are you happy? Now leave me alone. So it's 830 miles from here to San Antonio. Me and a couple friends drove down. Even when we were at the gate, I was like, something's gonna go wrong. I didn't think it was gonna work until I had him in my car and I was off base. So we went down, I went into their kennels, filled out a bunch of paperwork. They brought Diego out into an exercise yard. He hadn't seen me yet. And then they let me go in there and he was peeing on a tree. And I just knelt down and called his name and he recognized me immediately. And ran over, jumped on me, licking the face. We're rolling around, wrestling. And that was our reunion. He remembered me. We had been apart for 7 years and he remembered me. his doggy bed is right next to my bed, and I'll wake up in the night and look over because he started kicking the wall because he's running in his sleep, and that'll wake me up and I'll go, wow, I actually have him. Now I can't imagine life without him.
There. Call him off the search. Shower him with verbal praise. And let explosive ordnance disposal and their little robot find the bomb.
So I was talking to a really good acting friend of mine and asked him if he knew of any one-man shows that I could do for the local Fringe Festival that were 60 minutes. And he just said, yeah, yours. The initial process probably took me about 3 months to write a 45-minute one-man play about our experiences in Iraq. And I called it Bond, a story of a soldier and his dog. I wanted it just to be about me and Diego and some of the things we went through and how those things affected both of us and how we in turn supported each other to get through it. And then took it to the Kansas City Fringe Festival, and I didn't expect it. It turned out to be a huge hit. People loved the story.
Diego found a bunch of Glock pistols hidden inside the doorframe of the sedan. We dug a bit further and found a bunch of Iraqi police uniforms stuffed inside the seats.
I have had a lot of veterans come and see it, and that's always the most rewarding when they stick around afterwards and we talk for a couple minutes and they can share their experiences, or there's, some haven't said anything and have just hugged me and then left the theater. We need to give the attention that is due to these men and women who are sacrificing sometimes their lives, always their psychological well-being.
I was being affected by everything we were seeing and experiencing, and by my isolation from others.
Looking back on it, I'm very proud of the work that we did over there. There's no formula to say how many lives we saved, or if we saved any. But we took a lot of explosives and a lot of ammunition and a lot of weapons out of the equations for bad guys to use. There is definitely something to being in service of an idea that is greater than yourself. Service is the key to it. Serve your nation. I wanted to be of service. I wanted to have a positive impact on lives, which is ultimately a driving force behind my theater career too. I want to tell stories that have a positive impact on people's lives. I think everyone should serve. It changed everything. The absence of those nightmares, now that I have Diego back, is a big thing. The frequency of my PTSD attacks has lessened, the intensity of them has lessened. I've got my partner back.
My adoptive parents weren't able to have kids, and so they had adopted a boy, my older brother Brandon, and he wanted a playmate, and so I was adopted when I was 6 years old. Just growing up, ever since I was a little kid, I always dreamed of being a military man, not knowing what that was or what it was about. And it wasn't until my freshman year in high school, and they had a Navy Junior ROTC program, but there was a Sergeant Major from the Marine Corps that was running it, and his name was Sergeant Major Eldridge. And I saw him and how he carried himself and how he performed, and I was like, I want to be like him. And so ever since my freshman year in high school, I wanted to be a Marine. So I couldn't wait, so I signed up between my junior and senior year in high school. You're signed up into the Marines, but you're not actually a Marine because you haven't gone through boot camp. During my time in the delayed entry program was actually when September 11th happened. So that didn't sway me from wanting to go to the Marine Corps. In fact, I wanted more so to go to fight for our country. I went to boot camp 15 days after I graduated high school. As soon as I finished my infantry training was right when the Thanksgiving break started. We call it the 96 for 96 hours that you have off. And so as soon as I got back from the Thanksgiving 96, I checked in to my fleet unit, 1st Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion. I believe Bravo Company was the Warlords, Alpha Company was the Apaches or something like that, and we were the Charlie Company War Pigs. So I was there for just a few months until we got our orders, I believe it was January 10th of 2002, to deploy to Kuwait. So we left in January 2003 and arrived in Kuwait in mid-February, and we did various training exercises in Kuwait preparing for the war.
At this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
So I was actually on watch when the war started. It was at night, and I heard the air campaign start. And we had heard airplanes fly overhead, doing training missions in Kuwait, but I could tell that there was something very different about how the aircraft was going over the border into Iraq, and I knew then that it was starting, and that was when I got the word to wake up the officers and everybody else, and so we could get mounted up and staged to cross the line of departure into Iraq. And we could see where Saddam Hussein had already started setting all the oil fields ablaze, all the black smoke, and turned the sky black. On my first deployment as a scout, I was a saw gunner, and we were mainly responsible for doing route reconnaissance and calling for fire on the enemy. We arrived back in the United States on May 26th of 2003. It's kind of interesting because I actually graduated high school on May 26th of 2002. After our first deployment in OIF 1, we didn't know that the insurgency was going to take place. So when we got back to the United States, we were actually practicing and learning about North Korea and their capabilities. May 26th of 2004 was when we left the States to deploy on our second time to Iraq on a Navy ship. We were on the USS Comstock. When we got into Iraq, we were camped out of FOB Duke. That's Forward Operating Base Duke, which was on the outskirts of Najaf. So we would leave FOB Duke and go on patrols throughout the city. So in August, that was when there was a lot of unrest starting to happen with Muqtada al-Sadr and his Mahdi militia. If there wasn't Fallujah, this battle in Najaf would have been the big battle of Iraq. So I remember we went out on, we were the QRF, the Quick Reaction Force. Arrived on point to a traffic circle that was on the outside of the Shia graveyard. And I remember everything was all quiet until there was a mortar or an RPG that landed almost perfectly right in the middle of that traffic circle, and right after that point was when gunfire just erupted everywhere. And I remember at one point there was a wall that separated us from the street to where the cemetery was, and we're on the edge of that. And I remember we had a Marine, his name was Kinsey, and he was in front of me, and there was a sniper round that had come just inches away from his head. I came around that wall after Kinsey had moved and started returning fire with my saw. So we wanted to get a better vantage point of what was beyond that wall into the cemetery. So we left where that wall was to go on this rooftop. And it seemed like it was shortly after that was when there was 2 RPGs that were fired at us. One landed on, hit the wall behind us, and the other one exploded in the air above us. And I got hit from the one that exploded behind us. It kind of blew me up against the railing that was on the edge of the rooftop there. And I didn't know that I had been hit at the time. My leg had gone numb from the wound down, but I thought it was just a shock from the blast. So there's a guy to my left that was yelling at me, "You're hit, you're hit." And I'm still standing up. And I said, "No, I'm good, I'm good." And then about 10 seconds later, I just fell over backwards. Didn't even know why. Just from the weight of the gear, I just fell over backwards, and I felt the back of my leg and came back with a handful of blood, and I guess I am hit. And around that time was when they picked me up off the ground, and we all got off the rooftop and set us down on the first floor of the building where there were some Marines from 1-4 that had come to help, and they were the ones that bandaged us up. So we had a freelance photographer with us. His name was Lucian Reed, that had been there all day with us, taking pictures of us in combat. And so he got a pretty good picture of us when we were laying on the floor and getting bandaged up and getting ready to be taken out to be medevaced out of the area. The shrapnel went into my right leg and ended up right next to the femur. If it had been going any faster, it would have blown right through my femur. So I'm pretty lucky that it stopped right there. So after I'd been wounded, there was like 18 stops, if I remember correctly. Finally, we got taken to Camp Pendleton. It took me 6 weeks to get back to where I was at a place where I could actually be running. And after that point, I was requesting to the battalion that was still there in the States for me to be released to go back to be with my unit, to be with my guys, but they wouldn't release me. And around that time was when Fallujah happened, and our guys were really taking some hard hits in Fallujah, and so I really wanted to get with them to be able to help out. In Fallujah, we lost a few of our Marines. It started off with Staff Sergeant Holder and Corporal Kyle Burns, who was a friend of mine. Just as I think about these events, it's hard to not get emotional. In Fallujah, we lost Staff Sergeant Holder, my buddy Kyle, another friend of mine, Blake Magway. He was killed in a gunfight in a house. And we also lost another one of our drivers, Jason Smith. After we had all returned back to the States, my platoon had come back, and then the rest of our company. Myself and 2 of my buddies, Seth and Jason, we volunteered to be deployed again, and so we changed from Charlie Company War Pigs that we were with into a weapons company that was in 1st LAR, so that way we could go on another deployment. So at this point, I was a corporal now, not a lance corporal. So I was actually the scout section leader. And so I had a M16 with the M203 grenade launcher with it. And now on this last deployment, it was more stabilizing operations is what we were doing. So we were there from September of 2005 to around March or April of 2006. The end of my active service was June of 2006. So I finished my inactive reserve time on June 9th of 2009, and that's when they give you your honorable discharge papers. Well, I wanted to serve the country because I felt like I had a personal debt to pay to those who had served before me to secure my freedom, our World War II veterans and our Korean War veterans and our Vietnam veterans. You know, they fought then so I could be free now, and so I felt like I needed to be in the services to pay that debt and to secure the freedom for my kids. My wife, Thuy Van, and I have been married for almost 10 years, coming this March. We met at church, actually, Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa in California. We got 3 kids, 5, 3, and 1. So 2 older boys and 1 girl. There's a time for war, and so I don't think that it's difficult to be a Christian walking with God and to serve in the violent portion of the Marine Corps, the infantry. September 11th, my 3-year-old and I were sitting here on the couch and trying to explain to him how there's bad people in this world and how Daddy joined the Marines to go and fight those bad people to keep them from doing harm to us again.